Whether you've been producing live streams for a long time or you've just started out, you've probably been asked or you've thought the question, should I choose hardware or software? Well, in this video we're going to talk through the two options and see which one makes more sense for your use case. And before we jump headfirst into this video, I do want to kind of kick things off by saying it really will depend on a lot of factors along the way. I've found, spoiler alert, that a mixture of hardware and software really makes a lot of sense. Even choosing a comparison point for this video has been quite difficult, but I thought I'd stick with what I know and that I use here in the tiny studio. So I've chosen the A10 Mini Extreme on the hardware side, and on the software side I'm using vMix, and that's running on my custom built PC. While these two don't quite match up in terms of price, I think they are quite a nice comparison point because I can achieve a lot of the same things with both of them. Part number one, pushing it harder than you should. It is quite a challenge to push a hardware switcher beyond what it was made to do. Even the A10 Mini Extreme, when you've got it maxed out, all the inputs, all the outputs, streaming, recording, it does get pretty hot, but it does work pretty smoothly too. The limitations and the reliability of the hardware is often just down to how well the manufacturer has decided to cool the device. And aside from that and the occasional bug, you can't really push a hardware switcher beyond what it was made to do. At first you can feel a little bit more invincible when it comes to something like vMix. Even on the website it says up to 1,000 inputs, and that's a lot more than the A10. But in reality you'll want to limit the amount of camera inputs, for example, to a reasonable amount to let your computer actually handle that many inputs coming in. Even with something like NDI, again 1,000 inputs are possible in vMix, you'll still want to be very careful. I can imagine your network will not be happy about that much data being passed around. And so the issue with software in this context is you don't know if you've added one too many inputs until you add that one input, and then things start to crumble. Next up, new technologies. And speaking more about NDI, software-based switchers usually have the added benefit of being able to take advantage of these new technologies pretty fast as soon as they come out. And while I'm making this video, NDI 5 has already come out and SRT is gaining more and more traction in this industry. Software solutions like vMix have had SRT for years now, and you can use it today, and they said that NDI 5 will be in the product as soon as possible and will work nicely. Now of course you might not want to live on the edge in terms of your productions, but it is sometimes really nice to be able to grab these new technologies and really explore them with new ways of contribution and remote guests and things like that. Hardware switchers can often drag behind these new technologies, and in fact, usually you have to buy a new device to take advantage of a new piece of technology. The A10 Mini Extreme that I have here doesn't currently and probably will never support NDI or SRT for incoming and outgoing video signals. Now, of course I do have other options to bring NDI and SRT into my A10, like the BirdDog NDI devices or maybe the Pearl Nano from Epiphan. Those will bring SDI and NDI into my workflow. But it is another hardware device that I need. Maybe for more serious and paid productions, moving slow, taking less risks makes sense. But for YouTube videos, YouTube live streams, fun little charity events, you kind of want to try things out and see how they go. And for software switchers, I can do all that stuff fast. And for hardware, I need to go buy another device. Next up, software updates. I think things are pretty similar in terms of hardware and software when it comes to updates. You get some bigger updates here and there, but it's mostly small, tiny improvements along the way. For my two devices, the A10 Mini Extreme and the vMix setup, I found a few updates in the last few months. Nothing huge, but small little incremental changes. And this is fairly normal, the odd new feature, some bug fixes, it all makes sense. The worry, however, on the software side is it actually runs on a computer that wants to update as well. So you can get into some danger there. While you can remove auto updates on your PC and Mac, it's not the best idea to do that for security reasons, and you're going to find a time eventually that you need to do some sort of update. And this does bring forward that age-old question, when do I do the update? Never before a show, maybe not right after whenever you're just coming off it. Maybe you'll do it in a few weeks' time before the next show, and then the next show comes and you never get a chance to. So it's kind of an ongoing chase. I don't have a good answer for you on that, but I will say that turning off auto updates and having some control of that always makes sense, because then you can do the updates, do some tests afterwards, and make sure things work the way they did before. Doing tasks that are beyond production tasks. Turns out you can't check your email or watch YouTube videos on an A10 Mini Extreme. I'll admit that is a pretty odd statement to make, but it is an important one. While the A10 Mini Extreme is of course just a piece of hardware running some software, that software won't let you watch YouTube videos, it won't let you check your emails and do things that you shouldn't be doing on that device. And on the other side of things, with the software switcher, it is running on a PC or a Mac, and you can do things like download files, play games, check your emails, and do things that you probably shouldn't do on a production machine. It is a pretty good idea to get into the routine of not using your production machines for personal tasks. So having a computer beside you to check your emails, but keeping your vMix PC as your vMix PC. Can also be a good idea to keep a backup of your PC and restore from that after your gigs, so that you know that any changes that were made during that gig are not going to affect future gigs. To be fair though, I do use my production PC here at home for vMix and for everything else, coding, YouTube videos, editing and all that stuff, so it may work just fine. But it's nice to draw a line there somewhere if you can afford to have separate machines. Swapping parts whenever you're in production. While my A10 Mini Extreme has recording and streaming built right into it, I can cast my mind back just a few years ago when I brought my ATEM Television Studio HD, and I used to bring a HyperDeck with that. I used to bring a separate streaming device, and I had everything a little bit more modular. This modular approach meant that if one device was to fail, then I could swap that out for another device on the fly during or hopefully before a production started. But all of that is sort of gone out the window now that the A10 Mini Extreme has all of this built in, and I rely on one device instead. And the same things apply for the software side of things these days. It all runs on one PC possibly, and you're kind of hoping that PC doesn't let you down during a production. Either way, the plan here is to have a backup in place, whether that's an extra PC or an extra ATEM switcher or an extra streaming encoder. No matter what side of the scale you're on, hardware based or software based, having some sort of backup, which could be the other version, is the best way to go. I've heard many stories of people setting up a hardware show or a software show and it lets them down and they have to switch to a software show or a hardware show. So it's nice to have a mixture of both in those cases. Looking ahead a little more for this next section, we're going to go into the cloud. Over the last few months, I've been tinkering, experimenting, and taking a look at the opportunities of running things like vMix in the cloud on AWS or something similar. I can spin up a virtual machine running on AWS, I can install vMix, I can install Zoom, I can send in SRT feeds, and I can mix a whole show from anywhere in the world and then send that out to YouTube or to my client Zoom call or anything I want. Software-based solutions like vMix have made this somewhat possible, and it's already in a really good place. There are some things they could do to make it even better, but we're in a pretty good place for the cloud productions these days. Now, of course, getting an ATEM to run in the cloud means that you have to ship it off to someone, plug it into their network, and then hope that their network never goes down. So it's not really the same thing when it comes to hardware. I am seeing plenty of projects pop up where someone in this part of the world is controlling an ATEM in this part of the world, but it just doesn't make as much sense often. And there are a few things to figure out, like VPNs or other solutions to get that traffic to work over the network. So looking ahead to the future and cloud production, I think it really makes sense to spin up PCs to run things like vMix and then just let the cloud do what it does best. Keep working, be reliable, and you can just sort of dial into it and make your production run smoothly. And the final big topic is the buyer's process. When you want to buy a hardware switcher, the buying process is fairly simple. You want to decide how much money you want to spend, how many inputs and outputs you want to use, and then you're pretty set. In my case, I chose the A10 Mini Extreme because I wanted that many inputs, up to 8. I wanted some flexibility when it came to outputs, but I really wanted to record and stream internally as well. Since these devices now have all these features built in, you don't have to shop around, look for options. You kind of just settle on the one you like the most and then purchase it and go from there. For software switchers, it is a little more complex than that. vMix does a nice job of showing reference systems on their computer, and it shows a nice list of parts, some alternatives, and the pricing is pretty nice on that. The challenge I found was going from that reference PC page to the internet and finding all the parts I needed to build my custom PC. Now, I'm by no means a PC buying and building expert at all, but I did find that as soon as I started investigating, there were so many small little details between graphics card, model numbers, that I spent a couple of weeks finding and finalizing all the pieces of my PC. If you're interested, I have listed the specs of the PC in the description below. It's a pretty nice machine. I haven't really pushed it to its limit in terms of vMix, but it has been running pretty well for me for about a year now. But my main worry at the point of purchase was, should I upgrade this piece? Should I go for this higher piece? I'm not sure, and there was a lot of thought, consideration, and uncertainty that went into that process. And you also want to keep in mind the cost of the vMix license and a capture card if you want to bring in external cameras too. But with all that said, I'm really happy with the PC that I have here. I put a Decklink Duo in there for up to 4 cameras, and I also have a HD license of vMix originally that I have since upgraded to the 4K license because I wanted a few more features. And that just leaves us with the price. Blackmagic A10 Mini lineup does a lot of stuff for a pretty good price, and it's hard to beat that. But before long, you will find yourself filling up all the inputs on an A10 Mini Pro, and you'll want to grab the Extreme, and you will have to buy a whole other device to get more inputs. In theory, if you spec out a pretty good PC from the start, then it should get you pretty far, and you can add some more capture cards and get a couple more inputs here and there, or outputs here and there, to grow throughout the time that you use the PC. But just keep in mind not to push it too hard, and you need to know the limits of that PC as well. But use case does matter, of course. Like we talked about, for cloud production, you can run a very powerful PC, and you can grab a pro license for vMix on a monthly basis now, and you can put those two together for a really good price on a short-term amount of time. Now, I do trust that you'll know better about your budget constraints and how far you're willing to push it, but I would say just keep in mind the future, where you want to grow from here. Try not to get the 8-sem that suits you right now. You might want to grow into a bigger one later. Same for the PC. Start with the slightly higher spec one than the one you wanted to get originally. So to wrap things up, I have found that a mixture of both hardware and software really makes sense on certain gigs, and then hardware only or software only makes sense on other gigs. It's sort of a mixture, annoying answer that both make sense. Here in the tiny studio, I used to run my weekly live streams entirely from the 8-sem Mini, but in the last few weeks I've actually changed over to a mixture of the 8-sem Mini for camera switching, and then vMix for graphics on top, live streaming and recording. So for me, both together are working really nice. And maybe you agree, or maybe you disagree, or maybe there's something I missed along the way. Do let me know in the comments below. I'm interested in chatting about which one you think works best for you, which one has let you down in the past, which one has impressed you more than you thought it would. Do let me know in the comments, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much, bye bye.